Welcome, Mr. Moneim Adam, and we would like to begin by thanking you for taking the time to come and interview with the CJLPA, Cambridge Journal of Law, Politics and Arts, and your extensive career as a lawyer combined with your advocacy provides a valuable perspectives on pressing Sudanese issues. And so in this particular segment, we would like to address the events going on in Sudan, specifically human rights issues, the role of international actors, and more so the place of justice and peace in Sudanese society in the midst of rising conflict, especially in the Darfur region. So to begin with, I would like to, or we would like to ask if you can share some specific perspectives and examples from your experience as a human rights lawyer, where you have advocated for marginalized societies and marginalized minorities in Sudan.
Thank you, Solomon, and thank you for having me as well. I mean, it is a pity that to speak in this event that the Sudanese people and the marginalized communities are really, as we're speaking now, they're suffering in different regions in Sudan and in fact in the entire nation. I would like to say, I mean, the effort are taken, this is like happened, like this has taken place since, like very many decades, like since we're growing up in this atmosphere, we're looking at the atrocities and we're always looking for venues and efforts how we can help people to address human rights issues and as well to be able to articulate and as well to be supported how they can address the issues. So we have different kind of initiatives that from being a lawyer, being an activist, and as well as a non-violence activist. I think we can speak during the discussion around all those matters.
And how has your work before domestic courts and even as a legal advisor for international organizations shaped your perspective on justice and accountability in Sudan?
Generally, the experience has been, I worked in Sudan as a lawyer about 13 years ago. And I started my career working in domestic courts and as well working with international organizations addressing issues as torture and as well arbitrary arrest and other issues that facing young activists and as well politicians by guaranteeing the right to assembly and as well how they can work and advocate for the local societies. This experience really was kind of shaped throughout the years as like I started working immediately with one of the international organizations that based in London. We used to help to protect the youth to be able to demonstrate their rights as non-violence activists. During this time, so we faced as well with issues that connected to domestic laws, connected to domestic system, and as well connected to domestic authorities, as like they can detain the activists, they can detain them arbitrarily, and as well at some point they can detain even lawyers and without waiving their immunity. So I think during this time, I'm speaking now about earlier 2010 and onwards. So I think during this time, the experience was only about protecting. At that time, there was like no active war in Sudan to say that was like only in the marginalized communities. And as well, immediately then we shift to work with the marginalized communities around Darfur, Eastern Sudan, and as well Northern Sudan, and we support the people who came back as like a migrant from South Sudan as well. So it was like working in this kind of like area. Always something comes up, and then just like we're supposed to help to protect that. So we used one system called we do strategic litigation in order like to help to test the system and to test the laws and as well to be able to protect some rights when it is possible.
So can you explain more on this strategic litigation, how it functioned, and even for you also mentioned there was an organization that you used to liaise with in London. So what specific issues, maybe I'm putting too much questions in one, but what specific issues did you liaise in, and can you explain more on this strategic litigation?
The strategic litigation, because as I mentioned, there is like some obstacles connected to domestic litigation themselves, as like, for example, the law of evidence, it has some issues. The criminal procedures law, it has a lot of issues. The criminal code as well has a lot of issues. The issues I'm mentioning here, they are like contradicting with international human rights standards, as well with the standard for human rights that pursued in the African region as well by the African Union and other institutions regionally. So we use strategic litigation in a way as like there's like challenges connected to laws, connected to institutions. So we sometimes try to test the institution itself, and then when we go about a case, then we take it to the media, and then as well we take that case internationally or regionally when we get the challenge or when we face like some real challenges in the using the domestic courts. And that exactly one of the ways how we dealt with, and actually doing that, we managed really to push with my colleagues to do like some legal amendments, and as well to protect some rights for the activists and individuals. And so I think those all. So we mainly use that strategic litigation. At that time, I was working with organization called Redress Trust, and with others as well.
So is there any specific case or scenario where, like an example, a specific one, where now you used all these strategies so that maybe now you paint us a practical picture?
Yeah, if we speak about the old days and until now, we had like gone through a lot. As like, for example, I'm just going to give an example just to bring us back to the current situation. As like there is, so the law of evidence in Sudan, it has a lot of challenges in accepting the visual evidence, like such as like a video or like picture or like those. And using strategic litigation, we try to push towards that. We presented that, and we tried to push as like for them to be accepted. They were rejected at some instance, like the instant court, and then when we went to the Court of Appeal, it was accepted. And actually, in one case, we took the case to go to the African Human Rights, the African Commission. So we do that in order like to show if the system fails, how you can go like to another step, or actually how you can tackle the same matter from like another angle. So this is one case, and actually in one case, the visual evidence were accepted by the court itself, and the case was successful.
So and what challenges have you encountered while working, maybe with now pertaining all these cases and even with the NGOs in Sudan, and what experiences and how have these experiences influenced your approach to human rights issues?
Looking at this Sudan as like it was like under the ruling of Islamic government for about like 30 years or so, that has a lot of implications on the system and as well on the practice of the lawyers, the judges, and all this is the entire system. So working in that area, we always try to connect with local organizations, regional and international, in order to have like all the experience channeled together to help them to pursue justice and human rights. And working towards that, we managed really to build a very clear channel of like international lawyers that now I have. I'm part of like different kind of like legal international legal groups, but like one of them is really like now we're having I don't want to mention the name because we're like in the time of changing the name, so there is a challenge there. So but like in this experience now we're supporting local lawyers and practitioners how to be able to benefit from all the support that they can get from international experts, and as well if anything that can make their practice during like case or like to pursue justice domestically. So as well, we can use international justice venues, and as well we can use that. We have different kind of cases as well, and now we have very many cases pending in different level, locally, not locally for now actually, but like regionally and internationally. So as well, we are trying to help more lawyers to be able to use these systems in order to bring justice for the people.
And the challenges, what challenges have you faced in doing all this?
So the main challenge is actually, for example, for the Sudanese practitioners in particular, is actually the knowledge how to navigate through all these international mechanisms, one, and second as well, the connection and as well resources, because resources is one of the main challenges actually to pursue a case internationally, because they take very long, very many years, can go up to 10 years or more. If now actually just we give an example of like the case before the International Criminal Court now is going exactly more than 20 years, I guess, or something like that, or like 18 years and beyond. So I think this can show exactly how pursuing case in different kind of jurisdiction outside the country is going to be challenging, not only actually, but just like for the victims are waiting for justice for so long, but actually even for practitioners is going to take them a lot of resources to be able to do that. And I think there are not very many places where you can get fund or someone or like some institution that ready to fund cases, because it takes very long time, and it's so difficult to have like a very clear time frame. Right?
Sorry about the, I'm in the office and there's so much noise. So now if let's go to the crux of the matter, and in this situation, the ongoing conflict in Sudan, and considering Sudan and, as you said earlier, the historical cycles of conflict, particularly from the Second Sudanese Civil War and the first Darfur conflict. What do you believe are the root causes that perpetuate such violence in Sudan and Darfur?
So speaking of like the conflict in the region, and just coming back as well to Sudan, and just like as well the recent war in Darfur, Sudan never had like a peace that we can call it continually for more than 10 years over the last 70 years. So from the independence days, Sudan has been in these circles of war continuously. It had only like one break at some point after Addis Ababa agreement, which was like happened in the 80s. And during that time as well, just like all the time, we're having a new war. And I think this, I believe it has a connection very clearly with that the root causes of all these conflicts are never dealt with. And I think some of that is inherited from all the regimes historically in Sudan, but mainly I think as well because of the large marginalization and as well the injustice that happens over the history. And I think as well there are some issues with democracy and inclusion. I think all of those issues, they are causing these wars, and I think as well encouraging people to participate in a war, because I think in the region even itself, if you compare Sudan with that, I guess it has the most like longest history of having conflicts, internal conflict I'm referring to here. So I think that actually one of the reasons. So like all the things that I mentioned, I think they're like kind of participating in putting Sudan to have all like this continuous internal conflict, I guess.
Mm. And you mentioned the Addis Accord or the Addis Agreement. What did it entail, and especially because later we'll cover issues to do with peace and justice, what did it entail generally?
So when we speak actually about peace and justice, I think as well historically Sudan leaders, they dealt with peace and justice as like, not I mean as the international law defines that, but or like as the international debate. But I think in Sudan, leaders are always dealt with peace and justice as like two separate things. They consider peace is actually stopping the war, which that doesn't really like mean exactly that is a peace. but like they're speaking about like stopping the guns as like pursuing all the peace agreement. I'm just like saying all the peace agreement done for the Sudan history are like meant to do to only like stop the guns, and actually not even like for like a strategic reason, but just like for now, all the time it's like dealt with it for now. And I think that actually just like makes all the time people are not satisfied. When we go back to Addis Ababa agreement, it was one of the peace agreement that is done, I mean, during the 80s. And I think it was one of the peace agreements really like try to speak about the issue of the inclusive peace, but like it was not as well considered from both parties, the government and the rebel groups at the time, to deal with it as like from a trust place. So because the government at that time and the rebel groups at that time, they didn't as well actually have the will to implement the agreement, even within the issues that the agreement itself has. And if I just want to mention as well, other peace agreement in Sudan, they always speak about stopping the guns, but like they never pursue the issue of justice. And justice remains all the time an issue in the entire peace agreement throughout Sudan history.
So, in your opinion, then, coupled with the local conflict, how has the international interference either exacerbated or alleviated the conflict, the ongoing conflict in Sudan from the past and till today? And what role do international actors play in promoting, hindering justice in Sudan?
International institutions, when so I think actually I can put them in two boxes, maybe, if that's possible, like the diplomats from one side and the UN agencies from the other side. And both of them, I don't want to speak here actually really about like the regional mechanisms, because they never like played a great role. The only role that was played regionally, I think, by during Addis Ababa agreement and the comprehensive peace agreement, those two instances where there was like kind of a great role that played measured by, even though they were like both of them led by international actors, not as well the regional power, but like hosted in the region. So the international always played with Sudan as actually as well exactly how I spoke about the local actors. They speak all the time about let's stop the guns for now. Even the effort now are dealt with. The current war is always dealing with this war as just like let's stop the war now. And actually one example of that is the effort is done or led by the US and Saudi Arabia in Jeddah. That is entirely about having ceasefire, actually even not having a lasting peace, but even actually having just like a ceasefire, and as well having a humanitarian corridor that can help to move around the humanitarian support. And that I think as well is not something we can deal with the current war as like as well excluding all the civilians and just like dealing with the warring parties. That is, I think, as well one issue. If we look back into all the peace agreement done in Sudan's history, all of them as well were actually coming from that angle, dealing with both actually warring parties, but not including the civilians and the affected communities as well.
And when we speak about the international community also, except for the peace agreements, the international communities and state actors, to be specific, other states have been accused of hindering justice from happening in Sudan. So maybe you can shed more light on this and how this has happened occasionally.
Sure. So all this actually now the warring parties are backed up by some states, either in the region or somewhere else, and I believe there are very clear evidence of accusing one state or another, and as well, for example, some of the meetings that done recently, both warring parties in Sudan, they're accusing some states of supporting the other one, especially the military in Sudan. always accusing some states, and actually that caused some issues as well with some regional powers that accused of being supporting one party. Giving an example here, the military, which is like the Sudan armed forces, is accused some regional states, like for example, namely Kenya, and one of the spokesperson of the government, they really mentioned, I know you're Kenyan, so one of the spokesperson of the military, he came openly and he spoke about that when actually at that moment William Ruto is proposing to the IGAD to send some troops to protect civilians and to ensure the humanitarian corridors to be initiated to deliver humanitarian aid. So one of the military leaders came out and accused William Ruto of they wanted to occupy the state, and he said, "Leave alone the IGAD forces, but you have to bring your forces and come to fight." So that is actually one of the leaders of the military, and by that speech, really that made it very difficult for Kenya to lead the. I'm not saying I'm with or against that initiative, but then just like that made it so difficult for Kenya to continue the initiative around that too. Another event, the same leader came out last week as well, accusing Emirat, the UAE, of supporting the RSF again, and that as well caused a lot of diplomatic tension between the de facto government of Sudan now and as well the Emirat, and this actually so, and as well very many people that accuse Egypt. So the regional power of accusing Egypt of supporting, some people as well, they collected some evidence that Egypt is supporting SAF. So just looking at this, like all these scenarios, like this country is supporting this side or that country is supporting that side, that makes peace to be brokered in the current situation is very difficult because of that event. All these regional powers, they have a great role to play. For example, Emirat now, they have very good relationship with the SAF, with RSF. Egypt, they have very good relationship with SAF, and as well other powers in the region. If they're not considered to be brought to as well to sit there in that table to help to bring to stop supporting one side or another, and of course, I mean, this war would have not continue until today if the regional powers are not supporting these warring parties, because that is the way how they get weapon, that's the way how they get support, and I think that how the war is lasting this long, and it's going to continue if that case is going to continue. Not the international powers are not going to hold this regional power accountable for that support.
And you had earlier mentioned the comprehensive peace agreement that ended the war between Sudan and now what is South Sudan. And what do you consider was so vital in the comprehensive peace agreement that it stopped the war, and maybe in all this conflict, including the current conflict, maybe something is not being understood? What is in the comprehensive peace agreement that can be borrowed?
So I think just actually mentioning the CPA in this context here, it is hinting as well into something going to be kind of scary as well, because the CPA led to the country to split in two countries. That is something really negative. As when we look at from that perspective, I am very supportive of the South Sudanese to have their state, because they lived in a very long history and they're like being marginalized, and as well with that not being inclusive, with that lack of inclusivity. So I think this is something we have to consider, that is your choice after the referendum, which is supposed to be guaranteed, and I'm very in support of that. But the comprehensive peace agreement as well, actually, the warring parties at the time and the international community, they all come together to stop the war, and I think as well to include the referendum in order to help for this country to be, for the South Sudanese, by that definition, to have access to referendum. And I think that as well, peace agreement didn't have enough emphasis on justice. It was only about stopping the guns and that. So to me, to be honest with you, I don't think that is a good example to be used, because we had after that, there is Abuja agreement and there is Doha agreement. All they have nothing that really, like the warring parties, they consider to be important to be implement something to follow, not only stopping the guns, but as well to have a lasting peace, and that's supposed to be pursued through justice. And all this peace agreement, including the CPA, they have no like entire chapter with details, and both warring parties, they really mean it when they sign it, to have a justice mechanism. So I think actually not to something to be borrowed from the CPA, but it would rather be why the Sudanese people not sit together, learn from their local initiatives, and as well actually include all the civilians, include the leaders, include everyone who feels marginalized throughout the history, and sit together and have lasting peace by including everyone. But I think having borrowed something from all that history, I think that the history actually just like always repeat itself to bring back the idea of having another war.
And so moving on, the army has been accused since Sudanese independence of usurping power, and every time Sudan is at the brink of achieving democracy and good governance, it sabotages such efforts. So what the historical role of the army in Sudan and shaping the current, how do you see the historical role of the army in Sudan shaping the current challenges, establishing a civilian-led government?
So the army itself, since when I mentioned, actually before even the Muslim Brotherhood, when they come to power in the later last century, but the army itself is always formed, and it has a lot of metrics that made it very difficult for people from the entire country to see themselves as like this army represent all of them. This is one. Second, as well, the army is very politicized. That made the army always participate in the political game during the history, and that as well made the leaders all the time to be afraid from the army, and then they create their own militias. If we speak now about the RSF, according to all the legal definitions that I agree with, I believe that RSF, it is a militia, because it was created according to some laws and local laws, and the same army, they approve those laws, and they have different militia. They have the Popular Defense Forces in the past, and they have as well different kind of militia, and the government were like very proud of having those. So I think the army as an institution, it is the one all the time participating in political games, and as well creating some militia that can make they're ready all the time to sabotage the democracy, or like as well all the time they're ready to make the way to democracy is very difficult and not easy to be achieved.
So following on that, in your perspective, then, what steps can be taken to ensure genuine and smooth transition from military to civilian rule in Sudan, especially given the historical dominance of the military?
So now looking at the situation, for example, in Khartoum, and it's like taken over by RSF. Half of Umdurman is taken over by RSF. The entire region of Darfur almost now controlled by RSF, and the military moved to Port Sudan and other places. So I think actually looking at this picture just made it so difficult now to pursue peace without looking at like how to deal with the militia, with RSF and the aligned militias. And that just like make it very difficult how to look into moving forward for like to achieve the future for Sudan without looking at this like armies, how their conflict. RSF now in Darfur, I'm not sure like if For example, the people in Al Junaina, they agree that they wanted to be under the RSF ruling. And that is just something very kind of like frustrating that we look at it and we don't understand how people they are going to look into the future of Sudan without having the presence of army. I think the only thing to have for future Sudan is actually to have a new metrics for army and to go back to the barracks, how the revolution of Sudan was calling for, and just like to take away all and to dismantle all the militias around that. So I think that's the only way to secure having a national army without interfering with politics that can always bring coups and bring some end to any democracy or like can cut any way to democracy.
So, since you have spoken of the RSF and the SAF, maybe you can shed more light on the agreement that they had in 2021 and issues to do with the Sovereign Council that has brought us to this stage where we are in today. Maybe shed more light on the transition and the 2021 agreement.
Yeah. So the framework agreement that was brokered by the UNITAMs, which was like the most, it is like one of the huge mistakes done in the history, as like they saw how RSF they started to recruit some civilians to join their camp, and as well SAF, which is the military, as well they started to have like some recruitment around some other civilians to join their pack, and just like become too military. And as well, the RSF is very powerful at that time, and it became powerful because of the military itself, and the facilitation and the support and the goal they controlled over the history. Over the last 10 years, the RSF has like access to all the camp, the mining areas, and that just made it for them to be easy to control more. So the framework agreement, which is like I'm just calling to the mistake that done by the UNITAMs, they wanted to force peace no matter what, and that actually what exactly brought the. I'm not saying that the UNITAMs they bear all the responsibility by themselves, but like they played a great role in that process. Why they didn't really do like an entire assessment to understand what's going to happen if they push so hard to have an agreement done only with RSF. And I think that was supposed to be like assessed, well assessed by the UNITAMs, and I think that actually was like really like mishandled by them, and that brought this conflict forward. As well, when they saw RSF started to become a rebel group or like just to disobey the military during that time, as well they're supposed to be to back up and as well to come back to see how they can negotiate around this and to bring the RSF not to continue forward to this to end into that confrontation. I think all this aspect, I guess, if it was like considered by UNITAMs and the other forces, I guess and actually there are a lot of things. If it was like really monitored at that time, we're not going to be in this situation for now, because this war there was like a lot of ways to prevent it if it was like following the right way, but not like just looking for any howly peace.
So when reflecting on what you have said, there were ways to prevent the current war, and reflecting on also what you have termed the transitional process and all the issues pertaining to the Sovereign Council. So then, what do you believe constitutionally and institutionally? What reforms do you believe would contribute to creating a more and inclusive democratic governance within Sudan?
The issue now that is the constitutional document itself is very weak by its nature, and as well the Sovereign Council, they amended without even including the civilians at that time. How they made the RSF leader to become the deputy of the Sovereign Council. That was done only like unilaterally by the head of the army, which is Burhan. So I think actually for the Sudanese people supposed to start looking at the history and all the mistakes was done, and I think as well supposed to look into that and to come including all the local mechanisms for peace and justice, and include all of that in order to have an inclusive process for justice and for future. Because without having a clear constitution that everyone feels represented, I guess without that, there's no way to have lasting peace. I don't think the current or like the previous the constitutional document is it can be like the best draft, but there are like very many lessons learned from the history of Sudan. There are some constitutions where if we can look at them, there are some lessons to be learned, and just like something can be carried from there. I guess that can help to have kind of to pave the way for having an inclusive document where people can look at it and feel all included, and they believe that can take the Sudan to the next step.
For institutional reforms, do you think having a civilian leader without proper institutions weakens his or her rule? And that's why maybe the military or the militants get their way.
I think there are some examples. If we look at them as well, they used to have some circles of like instability, but then when they have the constitution and stuff like protected, again, it's like, for example, one of the basic things like now Abdelaziz Al-Hilu and the SPLM North, they're fighting for basic rights, and they're like never recognized. It's not about document, it's about the will. If the Sudanese people, they don't have the will to have lasting peace and as well to have democracy, I think even if we bring any constitution that copied from anywhere, it's not going to help. Like forcing people to believe that the constitution of Sudan is supposed to be like Islamic government, that doesn't help. Actually, even during the civilian government, the Muslim Brotherhood were like able to make a campaign against the leaders based on like any kind of a proposal. They say this is like with the measurement of Islamic ruling, this is like wrong, and this is like, they call them kafirs and they call them like, infidels, and that makes it so difficult. I guess like the will is number one, and then I think the documents and all that can come later. But I think actually we need to look into something can help people to become like unified one, and then I think anything can come later. But even the documents cannot be implemented well if there is even good document, but with like there's no human will. I guess that's something what is like really we have to look at it now.
Is regarding the 2019 revolution and the subsequent events within Sudan. How do you view the transitional period that came after? And it's been framed by some as a missed opportunity for achieving accountability and justice. Do you agree with this perspective?
Of course, I agree with that, and I add that the Sudanese youth and men and women they really like sacrifice a lot in order to get the revolution achieved its goals, at least like to remove the Muslim Brotherhood leaders and faces. But the problem happened because of the selfish politicians, and as well they don't have vision. That's why they come and they hijack, to be honest with you, they hijack the revolution itself, and they start to negotiate again with the military. That's what exactly they give back the door for the military to come back to participate in the politics, because the three slogans of revolution, like freedom, peace, and justice, none of them was like part of the agenda of those civilians who came and they hijacked the revolution. And that I call it just hijack, because they didn't care about freedom, peace, and justice at all. When they created the first government, it was weak. They didn't care about training all the people who were like come and join like the officers. They didn't even train They didn't provide a basic training for governors. Like someone has like no experience at all. They were like appointed to be governors, and just
Wow.
like they become, and the government just like become something useless. They appointed some ministers. It was like their first job in their life to be a minister, and just like after that, nobody cared a lot about like legal reform. Nobody cared really about the institution reform, and that actually just like led, and I think that is like I really call it the people who hijacked the revolution. They betrayed the streets.
Yeah. That's really profound. I mean, it's astounding to hear that this is the first time someone has ever held maybe even a position, but a position of authority, and now you have recognized authority over an entire town of people or even district. Wow. So given that, if you were to look at an effective transitional justice mechanism in Sudan, and we can even put it in the context of after 2019. So looking at that setting in particular, how do you think, considering all of the complexities that led to the situation that did happen, that it could have been done better, or it actually could have been made effective?
So first of all, I think they have to let, if not lead, but like just to let the youth create their own parliament. That was like prevented. That was blocked from the first days. Again, to initiate all the institutions were supposed to be an institution for peace, an institution for transitional justice, institution for reconciliation, and all those, like nobody cared about them. And just like they started to do the other roles as like to become leaders. That is, so the first thing to be done, the parliament supposed to be led by youth, women and men, and as well to start with, to initiate those institutions supposed to build the foundation is in order to start the work around justice, transitional justice, reconciliation, because it's like never dealt with in the previous discussion we had. Those like three things are like the main things that can put Sudan all the time in a position to have like another war after this one if they're not going to be dealt with from beginning. And again, the last thing I guess was supposed to be done correctly, to include youth, not to exclude them. And the youth who were like led the streets, and actually they were like the people who were supposed to protect democracy at that time, so supposed to protect the revolution at that time, but they were excluded. And the last thing I guess as well, if they were like, there is a trust for the people who hijacked the authority is supposed to be as well to trust the youth and to report to them when they're blocked by military. They're supposed to come back to the youth. And I think all those like not really like met. And I think those like the main thing led to this current situation, because at the end of 2023 we were like as well the UNITAMs were leading negotiation between like both warring parties now in order like to have the framework agreement dealt with by both parties led by SAF and RSF. I guess that is exactly how they put back the ball in the you know in front of the military.
Wow, those are really keen insights. I could also sort of see an angle. We were going to ask you how concepts such as environmental justice, distributive, retributive justice, all could have been implemented into the transitional mechanism that you envision as having been effective. And I sort of see how a youth-led movement and a youth-led transitional justice movement could lead to all of those things. Could you elaborate a bit on how a youth-led movement could sort of effectively result in an intersectional transitional justice movement? So again, looking at social justice, environmental justice, how would a youth-led movement in particular, do you think, be able to effectively sort of do well with these different forms of justice?
So I think we saw during the revolution time, when the youth really like managed to control the sitting area, it was like inclusive, small Sudan. Everyone sees themselves there. Yeah, there are some issues here and there because of the inherited history and things, but I think exactly I mean, like during my entire life, the only small Sudan that I saw, it was like has like some vision, or like I could put it like maybe not a vision, but like I could say it has like a way to go forward. I think that was like the sitting time. If youth are given to lead, or like just like they led to lead, as like it was like they successfully done with the revolution during 2019, I think. So we did one project, actually. It was not including youth only, but it was like actually a project that we did it in a collaboration with George Mason University. We did oral history project where we included, we like collected more than 120 interviews, as like just to ask people about like what peace means to them, justice and accountability, those like basic questions. And when we asked these people those questions, and we did the analysis with like very like kind of very like well, you know, equipped experts and that, and then we did it, and it, I think, and I believe it was the only well analyzed document was given during the seeking the discussion around the transitional justice in Sudan. So I think that can tell as well the gap about like there is no way for like you know enough analysis of like enough pieces to be included there. So during that time, we give this document. It has all the views about like what we see in that area. What does it mean, like this peace, justice, and those for those people from different places in Sudan. So I think that can show exactly the gap, and can tell exactly if the youth are given a chance to lead, they're going to really make it kind of that the small city can grow to become like the bigger Sudan, that everyone can really like have their dream met.
It's incredible. So with sort of the successes and the peace and happiness that you found in the small Sudan when it was there, even if it was only there for a short time, how do you see small Sudan being scaled up to big Sudan? Like, what do you think the process would be for the grassroots initiative to become bigger?
So I think historically, actually, the recent history of Sudan, we saw all the youth movement are actually by the way, the first obstacle in front of them is put by people they call themselves like Democratic Alliance. Like, for example, political parties all the time that they're scared of like having anything led by youth, and that is well, I think, something we saw. And I guess youth can they're able to look into the future. They're able to, because they have the dream, and I think they have the vision too, and they feel they're part of the future too. I think youth can be inclusive. Actually, now, for example, we see like in the small institutions that were like led by youth, we see like the inclusivity, we see like the justice, we see like the vision, and we see like everyone is really participating, and just like everyone, they feel themselves, they belong there. And I think if youth are given the chance to lead, which is like never happened, that I could say like in Sudan at all, they are going to be able to build the Sudan where everyone, they believe that they belong there. With just like those basic definitions are just like given to people, I think just like that can be the chance to rebuild Sudan, as like there is justice, there are like some institutions, there are like research, there's like a huge gap with regard to research when we speak about environmental harm. Nobody cares about when we speak about the mining activities that like really like led by the old regimes. Nobody cares about. I think like youth can put a research there that can help to stop all these activities that can harm the environment, and as well they can harm the future. And I think just like they cannot like let the democracy to be achieved in Sudan.
Incredible. Absolutely, absolutely incredible. You're particularly adept at sort of laying out roadmaps in the vision you're describing. So it's quite inspirational, I think. So Solomon will have just one more question regarding stakeholders within justice and accountability, and then we will have our final question for you. Solomon, if you would like to take it.
So for the different stakeholders in the community, be it the media, be it the communities itself, and be it even institutions of learning, like in what ways, even for policymakers, in what ways can they effect justice? In what ways can they effect the transitional justice?
So by the initiative I mentioned now, the oral history and others, I guess, for example, all regions in Sudan, they have traditional ways of dealing with justice. For example, in Darfur, in Nuba Mountains, in Sudan, in Eastern Sudan, in Northern Sudan and the center. All of them, they have some sort of like reconciliation, like social reconciliation, or like you can call it like, so tribal leaders can sit together and can do a form of justice that can everyone feel satisfied. And someone can ask a question like, why that not effective? For example, stopping the war in Darfur, or like stopping the war there, because there is no institution to take that further. If the communities are ready, for example, to reconcile among themselves, if there is a state can make that achievable, so that can make the record of that and just like to be registered, and they call it that is something to be implemented, so to be recognized through the legal mechanisms, but that's not happening. So they can do the reconciliation today, or like they can do the negotiations today around any matter happened, and then there is no support from a state, so that cannot hold itself up. That's going to fall. So speaking about future justice and future transitional justice. So as well, transitional justice itself, it is very kind of like targeted by some politicians in Sudan as like saying transitional justice is in a way of like supporting impunity, which is incorrect. And as well, that actually is also led for some people to advocate justice can only be achieved through the International Criminal Court, which is as well a big mistake. It cannot achieve that. We see like the ICC can have one case looking at it. They only try the leaders. They can only try 5 crimes, but like there are a lot. This is like an entire country in chaos. So I think only saying the ICC can deal with everything, that is a huge mistake. And I guess for that, academics, they need to write a lot in this area in order to clarify for local people how justice can be achieved. And the ICC is not the only thing can achieve justice. And I think actually one of the quotes that I hear from the ICC prosecutor said once that the justice doesn't die within the premises of the ICC. And I think that is a very clear way of speaking about justice. So I think scholars, academics, and all the institutions and the media as well can help to clarify that justice really is a process. Yeah. It's not only like something that can be achieved within one institution or one process. And transitional justice is like one of the important ways of dealing with accountability during when the entire country run in like a civil war, or like kind of like this atrocities happen. So I think in a summary, I guess it is important to look for justice as a process, and transitional justice is one of the very cornerstone for that, especially since like we have this war, you cannot take everyone to court. Some of those are supposed to be dealt according to the communities, and some supposed to be taken to the local courts. So I think building local institutions, that is very important and key and cornerstone to achieve justice too. So all this kind of effort, if they are done together, they can help to achieve justice. And I think that's going to be the first step to have a lasting process for justice and as well lasting peace. And I think that can happen only when we have a transitional justice that everyone to feel satisfied.
Yeah. So it's sort of to conclude our interview, it isn't lost on us that in all of our discussion about how the previous transitional justice movement did not quite affect in the way that it should have, and the effects on the population and the way that the government went. You yourself had to make personal sacrifices being involved in all of this, and it's astounding that you, for all these years, have been able to keep going and to say this is a process, and there sort of is a light at the end of the tunnel, but you have to keep following that tunnel. So what keeps you motivated to continue doing the work that you do into the future, and sort of what do you see propelling you into working with the future of Sudan?
Sure, I think, the dream to have a just Sudan, I guess that is something all the time keeping me kind of to be committed to this work. And in fact, last year, before the war, like by more than 6 months, I was doing a research with one institution. I was like pursuing one studies for anthropology. And I was doing, my question was, why people participate in a war?
Yeah.
And that was like actually more than 8 months before the war, because I was like looking at this situation.
Wow.
That it's like something happening. The thing is, I guess, to see people suffering in Darfur, suffering in Khartoum, suffering in Eastern Sudan, now in Northern Sudan and everywhere, I guess that requires anyone to be committed, if not to achieve the entire justice, but just like to participate in that process, at least like with the research, with one case, or like with educating one person. I guess that's something really important that we have to take into consideration all the time. So for me personally, I believe justice, it can happen. It's like it's going to happen soon or later. And I think that is something I'm always committed to. And I believe by participating in any process supporting the International Criminal Court, or supporting any regional mechanism, or supporting domestic institutions, or like just like helping local lawyers, or like local institutions to be able to do a record for something, or like just even actually just like doing interviews with elders, or like with some communities, or like doing our initiative now. We have an initiative about like data collection. One of the goals is, to achieve justice, to participate in those processes and to do advocacy for Sudan and that. But I think one of the goals really like to have that record for the future. And I think if we have that record for the future, people are going to see that and understand what has happened through the history. And I think they're not going to repeat it again. So I guess all of this can really pile up and always let us not to sleep enough until we see the justice achieved. And I think everyone committed a crime to face justice through local courts, through universal jurisdiction, or like through any kind of like procedures. But justice is a must, and it's going to happen sooner or later.